Today we are working on solving multi-step equation. So on the topic, if you'll fill that in, and also today's date. And this is page number 5 of Unit A, which should already be filled out on your note sheet. So similar to the notes before, there are some subheadings that are talking about what type of equations we're working with. So today we're going to be working with equations with combining like terms, equations with the distributive property, and equations with variables on both sides of the equation. And then towards the end, we're going to throw in several of those concepts together. So you might have an equation with the distributive property, and then you have to combine like terms, and there may or may not be variables on both sides of the equation. So we're going to discuss all of those pieces today. So in this first equation, if we have y plus 3 plus negative 3 plus y equals negative 2, sometimes I find it helpful to draw a line where my equal sign is so I can keep one side of the equation separate from the other side of the equation. So we can see now that we have a positive y here and a positive y here that we can combine on the same side of the equation. So we would have y plus y, which would give us 2y. And then we also have our positive 3 and plus a negative 3 that are like terms that we can combine. And so if we have a positive 3 plus a negative 3, that's the same as having plus 0 or nothing at all. We could just have 2y and our equal sign, and nothing is going to change over here, so that's going to equal negative 2. So if I were to write this as 2y equals negative 2, then I'm undoing this operation, so I would divide by 2. So then y would equal negative 1. So making sure that if you have like terms that you can combine on one side of the equation, that you do that before you try to solve. Another one similar to this says negative 12 equals negative 3 minus 10x plus 5 plus 3x. So we have some things that we can combine. So we have a constant of negative 3, and we have another constant of positive 5. So we can combine those terms. We also have a negative 10x and a positive 3x. So we have some things that we can combine on that same side of the equation. So there's my equal sign. So when I write these, my negative 12 is just going to come down. I always like to write my variables first. So if I have negative 10x and a positive 3x, that would simplify to be negative 7x. If I have a negative 3 and a positive 5, that would leave me with a positive 2. And so now I'm just solving a two-step equation. So if my variable is here, I need to undo this addition of 2. So I'm going to subtract 2. Negative 12 minus 2 is negative 14. And I'm left over here with negative 7x. To undo this multiplication between negative 7 and x, I'm going to divide by negative 7. So then x would equal negative 14 divided by a negative 7 would leave me with x to be a positive 2. So those are working with equations with combining like terms. So next we're going to look at some examples of equations with the distributive property. So on this first example, we have 96 equals and 6 in parentheses 1 plus 3x. So the first thing we have to do is to distribute this 6 through to each of the terms that are in the parentheses. So I would have 96 equals, well, 6 times 1 is 6, and 6 times a positive 3x would give me a positive 18x. And now we have a normal two-step equation, so we need to solve that. So to get this 18x by itself, we need to undo this 6. So to get rid of the 6, we would subtract. And 96 minus 6 is 90. And we're left with 18x on the right side of our equation. To undo this multiplication, we're going to divide by 18. And 90 divided by 18 will give us a value for x to be 5. Okay, let's look at another one. So if we have negative 2 and in parentheses 5 minus 5g equals negative 70. So same idea, we need to distribute what's outside of the parentheses to what's inside the parentheses. So negative 2 times 5 would be negative 10. Negative 2 times a negative 5g, so remembering that you have a negative times a negative, would give you a positive 10g equals negative 70. To undo this negative 10, we would add 10 to both sides. So we would be left with our positive 10g is equal to negative 70 plus 10 is negative 60. Divide both sides by 10. So x equals negative 6. Okay, one more of these. So 70 equals 4, and in parentheses 4 minus 6n, close parentheses, plus 6. So keeping in mind that we are only distributing this 4 to what's inside the parentheses, so it's going to go to that 4 and to the negative 6n. But since this positive 6 isn't in the parentheses, then we're just going to bring that down as another constant. It doesn't get the 4 distributed. So we would have 70 equals 4 times 4 is 16. 4 times a negative 6n is negative 24. So negative 24n, and then we're just going to bring down our plus 6. And so then we have some like terms on this side of the equation that we can combine. So we have this positive 16 here that we can combine with our positive 6. So remembering that if they're on the same side of the equation, that we can combine those like terms. So when I combine my 16 and my positive 6, I would rewrite my equation as 70 equals negative 24n plus 22. So then I'm going to solve for n. So I would subtract 22 from both sides. When I subtract 22 from both sides, I would have 70 minus 22, which would be 48, equals negative 24. So then I would divide by this negative 24 to get n by itself. So once we divide both sides by a negative 24, we would get our value for n to equal negative 2. All right, the last thing today we're going to cover is equations with variables on both sides. So we're going to have 2 of those examples to go through, and then there are 3 for you to try on your own. So when you have equations with variables on both sides of the equation, there are several different ways that you can work with those. And you have to keep in mind that the goal of solving an equation is to get the variable by itself. So just because I work them out one particular way doesn't mean that there's not another method that would work. So I always try to move my variables to the left side of the equation and then move my constants to the right. So those are some of the strategies that I use to help me keep track of the process, and it also provides a little consistency as well. So when I have negative 5x minus 10 equals negative 3x minus 4, I like to move my variables to the left. So my first goal is to move this negative 3x to the left side of the equation. So in order to undo a negative 3x, I'm going to add 3x to both sides. So when I do that, I would have negative 2x minus 10 is equal to, and I'd be left with negative 4. So then I'm moving all of my constants to the right. So to get rid of this negative 10, I would add 10 to both sides. And I would have negative 2x equals, and negative 4 plus 10 is a positive 6. When I divide by negative 2, then x equals negative 3. So like I said before, there are a couple of different methods that you can use, but I always like to move my variables first, and I also like to move them to the left and then move my constants to the right. It helps me keep track of that. So let's try one more. So negative 9 plus 4r minus 2r equals negative 2 plus 3r. So in this one, there are some like terms that we need to combine before we can solve the equation. So we would have negative 9, and if we have a positive 4r minus 2r, that would be a positive 2r once we combine, equals negative 2 plus 3r. So I'm going to move the r's, my variable, to the left side. So I'm going to subtract 3r from both sides. And so then I would have negative 9 minus r, or minus 1r, depending on how you like to write it, equals negative 2. And so then I'm moving my constant to the right side. So I'm going to add 9 and add 9. And so make sure that you're careful here that you're left with a negative r, so that minus sign comes down. And negative 2 plus 9 would give you a positive 7. And so remember that you have to get rid of this negative sign. So remembering that this is a negative 1 that's right there. So in order to get rid of that negative 1, you can divide by negative 1. So then r equals negative 7. Just keep in mind that if you solve it a different way or in a different order, you should still end up with the same result for your variable, so it wouldn't affect that. All right, the next thing that you should do, there are 3 towards the bottom of your notes sheet on the back, so you need to work out those 3 on your own, and then when you're finished, come find me for the answer key to double check your work and to make sure that you got the right solution.